morning, and thanks for joining us once again here on Leading Edge. I am Jeff Smith filling in this week. I wanted to start by piggybacking off of the elections that we just went through, the midterms, a lot of talk, a lot of social media activity. But one of the things that really grabbed my attention from time to time, we'll run stories during the course of elections that are kind of off the beaten path, if you will. They grab your attention, and I wanted to dive more into it. I've got Chuck Corra here joining us today from Generation Citizen, because Chuck, we ran the story about the push, the legislation, if you will, to try to get young people the right to vote. And we're not talking 18-year-olds. We're talking the potential for having 16 and 17-year-olds vote. So first and foremost, Chuck, let's introduce you to our audience. Give us a little bit of a feel for what Generation Citizen does.
Sure. Well, Generation Citizen advocates for comprehensive experiential civics in the classroom, and we work in a number of states to try to get more classrooms requiring civics education and providing civics education in an experiential capacity. So that's primarily what I do. I work on our policy and advocacy team, and in part of that, we also manage the National Vote 16 campaign to lower the voting age. So all of those things kind of fall into our bucket here at Generation Citizen.
All right, let's dive right into that. We're talking about possibly lowering the voting age to 16. I want you to give me your pitch speech. You get in front of a big room and you're trying to convince them why this is a good idea.
Sure. Well, we've seen more and more young people wanting to become part of the political process and wanting their voices heard. So what better way than to allow them to vote in municipal and school board elections, which is oftentimes what the legislation or the proposals that we work on feature. When you're 16, you're obviously still pretty young, but you're also old enough to operate a motor vehicle in most states, get your license, and you're also old enough to work a part-time job. And so we feel like if you're old enough to be taxed for a job that you work, you should be old enough to have some say in maybe the policy that goes into that or some of the policies that govern your life, such as school boards. So I think that that's really what we strive for and advocate for. We've noticed that young people are more and more engaged, and we also know that voting is a lifelong habit. And if you establish those habits at a young age, you're more likely to be a more reliable voter further in your life. And then finally, what I would say is we want to have young people feel invested in their communities. So many communities don't have the proper human investment that they need nowadays, especially rural communities. And I come from a very rural state, and I understand this very well. By allowing young people to vote, and especially in local elections when they're younger, it allows them to be more invested in their community. They feel more invested. They're more likely to come back and bring their own human capital to that community, or just to contribute in other ways. So those are really the big things for us. We want young people to feel empowered and feel like they're being represented, or at least they have a role in who represents them.
So let me ask specifically, you're not talking every 4 years giving 16-year-olds the right to vote in a presidential election, or to have even voted in these midterms when it comes to national politics. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think
or even statewide.
Yeah, so for the most part, what we work on is local measures, or measures at the local level. For example, in Culver City, California, right now, they just voted on a measure to lower the voting age, I believe, for citywide elections and school board elections. So typically, what we're working on is issues in smaller capacities like that. I don't think, to my knowledge, we've worked on anything that would federally expand the voting age. Although I don't want to say that we're necessarily against that. But primarily, we're working at the local level. We see that to be the most success.
School levies. Are you saying 16-year-olds would be able to, I guess, grasp that topic and the seriousness and the importance for what community members have to pay as far as taxes are concerned?
Yeah, and so what I'll say again is it really depends on the municipality and the wording of the ballot initiative, for example, or the ordinance that the city council is passing. So in different places, it is really varied. But we feel like, we trust our young people with a lot of things. We trust them to operate a car without killing someone on the road. We trust them with being able to work a part-time job and be responsible with that. And so part of that is also teaching them how to be responsible with voting and with the representation that they have. And so I think that when it comes to that, we really should be looking at them as more looking at this as more of how do we raise young leaders? How do we raise people to be leaders and to be responsible members of their community? And this is part of that. It's part of empowering them to do that and to be able to understand and to do the critical thinking involved on things like school levy votes and other stuff like that.
Kids are influenced. Like when you guys look at this and you say to yourselves, okay, kids, young people, they are influenced by these three top things. What would you say? And I only ask this because I went back to school a few years ago and I thought to myself, I'm like, man, I am much more equipped to handle going back to school, getting this degree, this advanced degree, than I would have even been getting my bachelor's degree because I wasn't mature to a level of life experience. So I I ask you not only I guess the question about being influenced, but also the maturity. And this is a weighty topic, right?
Sure, yeah. And I guess it's hard for me to say what are the biggest three things that influence young people necessarily, but I know that it certainly is the people around them, their peers, their parents, their teachers, the people that they look up to in their community, the leadership and role models in their community. And so I think for the most part that would really track. And I think as we grow older, we mature every single day. When I was 25 years old, I have a lot different view of the world than I do at 32 now. And I would say the same for young people, whether they're 16 or 18. There's always more growing, more maturity, more opportunity to be a leader is when you go later in your life. But I think that we view 16 to be a really strong age to start instilling those values of leadership and the value of community investment and actually understanding what goes into making a community around you. And so we view that as an age that is appropriate to allow young people that opportunity to start feeling more invested in their community.
We got about a minute. We got about a minute left, Chuck, and I appreciate Chuck Corra once again from Generation Citizen joining us. Chuck, do you think this creates monotony for poll workers, for people who are putting the local boards of education elections that are putting these ballots together to make a section just for 16, 17-year-olds? You see what I'm getting at?
Yeah, no, I definitely understand. I think that there's certainly some logistical hurdles involved with it, but I think that the costs of that really are outweighed by the benefits of having more people involved in the electoral process. And I think the more that we can enfranchise voters, the better off our democracy is and the healthier it is.
Chuck Corra from Generation Citizen joining us with some insight into this legislation. I don't think we're looking at it as far as Ohio is concerned anytime soon, or Michigan for that matter, right?
Michigan possibly, although I don't think there's anything current on the ballot here or Ohio or in Michigan. But I know that we have been having conversations with folks in both places, so I would keep an eye out for both.
All right, Chuck, thank you so much. I appreciate your time. Stay
Absolutely.
with us. We'll be back with more Leading Edge right after this. Welcome back here on Leading Edge. My name's Jeff Smith filling in this week. Want to welcome in Brian Lutz from the University of Toledo. There has been so much talk over the last year as far as the changing dynamics and the changing landscape of collegiate athletics and what now has to kind of be played into the whole recruiting process. And well, I don't want to take words out of Brian Lutz's mouth. Let's bring him in right here, right now. Brian, thanks for giving us some time. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely, Jeff. I'm happy to be here this morning.
So, Brian, let's talk about NIL, name, image, likeness. And as you understand it, is that a fair assessment to say how it has changed the landscape of collegiate athletics?
Yeah, I think fundamentally speaking, it's changed the entire landscape of college athletics. From the recruiting process all the way through the student athlete experience. It's been a complete change since this came into effect roughly summer of 2021.
To bring our viewers up to speed, exactly what is happening when it comes to these athletes, specifically it hasn't been expanded to every single sport on campus. Is that correct?
Yeah, pretty much. All of our student athletes have the opportunity to engage in name, image, and likeness opportunities, and many of them have over the last couple of years. So it is, a lot of people focus on football and basketball most specifically with NIL, but all of our student athletes have the same opportunity.
This all came about trying to give kids a little bit of spending money. I mean, is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I would say so. I think as the general public has kind of been involved in the name, image, and likeness, and sort of the general consensus, I think, among the general public being that athletes should be able to earn a little bit more than maybe what their scholarship will allow them to receive. That's where name, image, and likeness has sort of gained traction, and that kind of snowball effect, culminating with the Ohio executive order here in the state of Ohio in the summer of 2021.
When you get a young student athlete who comes to your office or comes to the university and says, I am interested in this, are there some boxes that you have to check off? Because obviously, if somebody comes to us and says, put me on TV, I've got a great story to tell. There are a few boxes we have to check off before we say, okay, let's hear your story first and then go from there. Talk to me about kind of, I guess, muddling through that.
Sure. Yeah, I think, when I mentioned the Ohio executive order that came into effect in July 2021, and with that, there are certain parameters that we're required to follow as a state institution and an institution within the state of Ohio. And that's provided us some guidance to our student athletes and some of the things that they can and they can't do when they're exercising NIL. I think the most important things to keep in mind are that first of all, that this is a quid pro quo arrangement. In other words, a business can't pay a student athlete and then the student athlete doesn't provide a service in exchange for either a cash payment or even a gift in kind from a business. And so that's a really important part of it. Also, that our athletes have to report their name, image, and likeness activities. That's part of the executive order, and that's something that we ask our athletes to do. We have a platform for doing so that we utilize, and a company that works in the NIL space that allows us to document these things and allows athletes to engage with us when they're exercising NIL. So those are the two biggest things I would say when an athlete would come to me and ask me about an NIL opportunity.
So said business says, I'd like to have certain football superstar, certain basketball player represent us for a new product, something along those lines. Are they signing a deal with that student athlete? Do they have to sign a deal with the university? I'm sure this was a lot of learning on the fly kind of a situation for you guys, because it seemed to have happened overnight. I know it didn't take that long, but it seemed to have happened rather quickly.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, with the athletes, they're working independently from the university. So we have to be aware of it, of course, because they're students here at the University of Toledo and their eligibility could be impacted, if something goes sideways. But for the most part, they're working on their own with businesses and collaborating with them. They're exercising these agreements with the business. We're just asking that once those agreements have been made, that they're reporting that information to us so that we can document it.
Brian, once again, Brian Lutz from the University of Toledo joining us, kind of I'm going to call him the NIL guru as far as the school is concerned. Brian, we've got about 30 seconds left in this segment, but what are the cutoffs as far as these students are concerned and what they can and can't represent?
Yeah, the cutoffs, and again, we go back to the executive order with some of the things that athletes can't represent. And so, you talk about alcohol products, you talk about, marijuana is legalized in Michigan. So if we happen to have a Michigan athlete who may be interested in representing such an enterprise, they wouldn't be able to do so. And so I think, some of those areas that, kind of represent areas of concern for the institution and, from a perception, I guess, standpoint with the general public, those general areas wouldn't be permissible as far as athletes engaging in those type of activities. Vaping products would be another example of something that an athlete wouldn't be able to participate in. Tobacco, a lot of those types of areas, that type of representation wouldn't be permitted.
Makes sense. Brian, stay right there. When we come back from this break, I want to talk to you a little bit more, not only about name, image, likeness and how it has changed the dynamic of collegiate athletics, but also I want to talk to you about recruiting. Stay tuned. We'll be back right after this. Our final segment here on Leading Edge this week, once again, being joined by Brian Lutz from the University of Toledo, kind enough to join us to kind of school us a little bit on this new world of name, image, likeness for collegiate athletics. Brian, we were talking before about, kind of the quick learning that had to be done to try to, I guess, get your hands on what this new world would be for collegiate athletes on your campus, on campuses all over the country. My interest is here again, and tell me if I'm right or wrong. Here again, we get the haves and the have-nots going up against each other as far as schools competing for recruits. Does this add, and is it fair to say this adds just another caveat to the whole process? Tougher for Jason Candle to go out, tougher for Todd Kowalczyk and Trisha Collop to go out and get these premier athletes if they've got another school barking down their door saying we've got this much to offer in NIL. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely fair when you look at the way NIL has kind of played out over the first 2 years. The schools that you're talking about that have the biggest NIL support are all what you would consider Power 5 schools. And so talking about Texas A&M and Miami and Nebraska, a number of other schools involved that do have an advantage over some of the middle tier institutions like our own in competing for not just athletes that are coming direct from high school, but also concerns with athletes that are on our campus and the attractiveness of entering a transfer portal and maybe exercising an NIL opportunity that way as well. So yeah, it is a concern to us. One of the things that we're trying to do though is put us in the best possible place for where we are in the Mid-American Conference and among what you would call a group of 5 institutions. So that's the 5 conferences that are organized that are just below the Power 5 level within Division I, all football bowl subdivision schools, but sort of in the same place, I would say, as far as competitively and budgetarily speaking.
I got to tell you, there was a story earlier this week about a Big Ten school that had donors drop $1 million of matching funds into their NIL program, specifically earmarked for the football program. And it was one of those things, football wasn't doing well. All of a sudden, these NIL dollars come in. I mean, they're not saying it's directly correlated to trying to help the program get more kids in, but come on, we're not stupid, right?
Right. Yeah. And the athletes, that are being recruited, their families, they're not stupid either as far as seeing what's available out there to them. Now, the NCAA, they've provided some guidance to schools in all of this, and one of them being that NIL can't be promised to a student athlete contingent upon their enrollment at a school, but we know that it's being discussed, at various levels within the recruiting process, even if it can't be promised that this is general information that everyone's aware of and athletes and their families can see. If they're interested in NIL, where perhaps the best opportunities can lie. And so from that standpoint too, you see the difficulty for us in that process. I can also say, we've taken great efforts to inform the folks that support our programs that again, things being what they are, that our primary interest here is for our supporters to support the athletics department at the University of Toledo, and that NIL, well, we view that as an important thing, and that athletes can receive and should receive NIL opportunities, that we don't want that to take away from donations that are being made and fundraising that's being done by our athletics department, because then, that's money that we're not going to be able to have to pay coaches, as an example, or improve our facilities in some way or another. So it's a really delicate balance there as far as that's concerned, with our supporters.
Brian, in my last minute with you, I wanted to ask for our viewers to understand, kids at UT, kids at Akron, kids at BGSU, kids in the MAC, how much do they stand to make? Or is that kind of one of those, it's too broad of a scope, and they could make this much, they could make as low as this much?
Yeah, I think, for the most part, I think they can make whatever the market will bear. And some institutions are at a bigger and better advantage than other institutions, just because of where they reside. A more rural institution, there may not be the type of NIL opportunities that there might be in a city such as Toledo, that has Fortune 500 companies within it. So from that point of view, it kind of depends case by case, I think, on where the institution is, where that community is as far as supporting the athletics program and student athletes in general. And I think a lot of that helps determine what the NIL opportunities are. If you're just talking about within our league, I think it just kind of depends on a case by case basis. But I think for us, if you're looking at it from a competitive standpoint, I think we're in a better place than most.
Brian Lutz from the University of Toledo, giving us some insight into this new world of name, image, likeness, and how it affects our student athletes here locally. Brian, we appreciate it. We know you've got a busy day. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate you having me today.
And we'll be back right after this. As always, we appreciate you spending some time with us here on Leading Edge. Have a great holiday week. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.